Hi, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to come along tonight and talk to follow on for those two great speakers. Totally support everything that both Rachel and Paul have said. I'll just give you a wee bit of a background of where we're in. I'm just going to give you a little tool because basically what Rachel and Paul have said, I don't want to confuse you with more tools, but I just want to tell you a wee bit about our network and some quick tools that you can actually take when you're actually starting to understand your impact. So Social Value Aotearoa is another network like Impact Hub and like Rachel Centre of Social Impact, where we're really keen to actually change the way the world accounts for value and actually build in sort of social value into just to really accounting for what matters for the environment, for services and things like that. So we're part of a global network, Social Value International. New Zealand is a joint member network and we sit on the Social Value International board. It basically works around the social value principles and it looks around building our principles leading to an inclusive and social, environmental and economic value and decision making, people, building up people's knowledge, developing guidance and practice, and then building sort of power so that really that people can support their learning growth and build a movement to really change the way the world counts for value. One of the tools that they use is the social return on investment training. So that's basically a way to actually try to actually put it into a value that actually is equitable to what people are used to, like accounting value, but really around the impact around for a dollar investment returns so much in social value. But today, really, I just want to talk about really just some tools that could potentially help you when you're actually trying to articulate your impact or actually start your impact journey like Paul and Rachel talked about. It's really exciting that Paul talked about the impact management project because we, as well as the social return on investment college, the Social Value International is one of the 16 standard setting organisations that actually work together to form a structured network to work together to support the impact management project. So it's around building global consensus on measuring and managing reporting impact on sustainability. So yeah, so it doesn't matter where we're coming from, we're all actually trying to actually build that movement of commonality. So when my background started, basically for the last 10 years, I've worked for a community anchor organisation in West Auckland called Te Whānau Waipareta. And what it wanted to do was move from being a service provider of social services, justice, education and health to really, and just delivering what mattered, delivering services that it was funded to really understand what the needs of their community are and what is the impact that they make. So to actually be able to advocate for better services to meet the needs of their community and to also really tell to support whānau from moving from languishing, just to be always in crisis mode, to be really sustained outcomes, to be flourishing and they're champions of their own change. So through that, we started to look for a tool that could actually help us move from what Paul talked about. We understood the impact, but really understand outcomes. What actually is a result of that? What are the outcomes that we're actually trying to move from just doing a service provider to commissioning for outcomes, being able to talk about we want to actually provide services that meet these outcomes opposed to a prescribed service. So when they looked around, that's how they came across the social return on investment methodology, because that started very much from a bottom-up approach around the very first social value principle is involve your stakeholders. So when you're working directly with your community, that's probably where what we wanted to stand. So it's just one tool like the ones that Rachel and Paul have talked about. So one of the things that we did in a large organisation, just like Paul and Rachel talked about, it's really hard just to go straight to measure your impact. You really have to understand the impact and actually build an organisational culture around understanding what matters and then looking around how do you measure what matters and then how do you articulate it. So this tool here, what we developed was, I suppose, because my background has changed and taking people with me, I was looking for how do we take this theoretical framework and actually make it in practice so that people can actually really understand it. So one of the first things, if you're accountable to your stakeholders, then you're relentlessly innovating to provide better services to them. And that's exactly what we're all trying to do. So not only are we trying to say that we're making impact, we really want to actually keep continually improving and actually looking at what is the best that we want to actually achieve. So the social value principles involve the 7 principles. Involve stakeholders, understand what changes, value the things that matter, only include what is material, don't overclaim, be transparent, and verify the result. So they're the principles of social value, and that's really leads to the social return on investment methodology. And there are full training courses around that. But one of the things we found when we were trying to actually understand what is our impact for our community, what difference do we make, how do we build that culture of impact, was we needed to bring everybody along to understand the terminology and actually really understand either what we were actually contracted to do and what in reality was actually happening on the ground. So this little tool is a great way to actually socialize and get people talking about, if you want to understand what a difference that you make within your organization as a team. We often run it as a team building exercise, and it can be run at a program level, it can be run at an organization level. But because the organization I worked for was multi-sector and huge, over 200 employees, we actually had to we started off at a program level. And what we wanted to understand is what is it that was changing as a result of the program that were delivered, and not actually just what they were contracted to do, but what was the impact it was making. So we developed this tool called the Impact Snap. And this was just really layman's language of actually trying to introduce these terms and introduce what we were trying to do with our staff so that they would actually get an idea and actually be able to tell the stuff that actually really matters to them and really matters to the people that they're working with, and actually decode the language. Because one of the biggest things we find around impact measurement and this journey is that the language is quite, some people feel it's a bit, what does that mean? Like theory of change, logic models, all that cool stuff that really ramps us up. And really, what does it matter? So the Impact Snap works down similar to what I saw with the Impact Management Project and some of the other tools. Understand who and what changes are a result of our activities. What is the very much through the family's eyes or the client eyes, and then looking about how do we prove that they've changed, and what changes are we most valued, and is it all down to us? Now, the thing is, what changes are most valued is interesting that when you begin on an impact journey, or when you begin to understand, you can't measure everything. You know, you cannot, you need to actually just start off and actually be able to tell the story of change in a way that actually is most valuable to the families or what your organization is trying to achieve. So we'd run these little workshops with the teams, and we'd actually just simply say like, okay, tell us about your program. Tell us who experiences change through a result of your program. How do they change? What is it? You know, what do you see happening? You know, or like it, and then that's the first workshop that they're just starting to get used to the language of stakeholders, who changes, how do they change, starting to introduce what is changing, and then we put them down in their words. So we'd actually just write down what they would actually be saying, and then we'd actually start to introduce them to say, is this the change? So from grow self-confidence and self-belief to increase self-confidence and self-belief, does that make sense to you? So we'd actually sort of start to transition the language for them, and sort of build out some workshops within there. And then we'd actually ask them, even in time frames, so how quickly do you see those changes? Like, you know, do you see them like within the first month, instantly, long term, things like that? So we'd start to work out with time frames, because one of the things that Paul mentioned is that the impact is usually quite clear for people. What's hard is about the outcomes, the journey to outcomes. So really for this was the beginning of actually even just really understanding from a program, opposed to just what's contracted to do, what are actually the changes for the stakeholders that actually happen within the program. And then interesting enough, then we'd also ask them, so how do we prove that that's changed? And that's our evidence collecting. And it's really interesting when you're working with a lot of frontline workers that when you say, oh, now we're going to start collecting evidence on how people are happier or are more connected to their community. And there's often a really heavy feeling of, oh my God, you're not asking me to collect more data or not. But by including them and actually saying, so how do you know that this is happening? What do you see? You start to build up a picture of where you could potentially collect the evidence around what that means. So that actually starts to give them the idea around building up. You can't just say something, you actually also have to actually be able to evidence it or start to prove it. And those tools that Paul and Rachel were talking around self-assessment tools, videos, all those kind of things became part of the way you can evidence. But this little exercise here probably takes 2 workshops with a team, but the idea of it is really to actually socialize the idea of what impact is, what's the terminology is, what stakeholders begin to really understand what changes. And sometimes there are negative changes, so understanding that impact or outcomes aren't always good outcomes. There's a domino effect that somebody hasn't really thought about, unintended outcomes, unintended impact that actually happens because they didn't actually think that would happen, but the workers or the people that are working with the programs actually see that. So that's really good too, so actually see that through. And then we start to frame it into what we're talking about around theory of changes. And so we use their words there, and we then start to put them into the typical theory of change or the logic model, where they can start to see that this is the input, these are the activities that they do, these are the outcomes that they start to see grouped into the various timeframes that they've said, and this is leading to the impact. And then the yellow ones are what we talk about. What are the ones that are the highest priority for you? Just actually for us to start to tell the story, because when we're starting to measure impact or measure outcomes towards moving towards change, we actually don't want to overburden everything, and we want to get people familiar with it. So you choose the ones that really are the most valuable, and often are the ones that light up the workers' eyes when they talk about why they come to do the work that they do. When we talk about prioritization of which one's the most important, there's a variety of tools there around our unique ability to sustainably affect change. There's the value-based prioritization games, the value games. There's simple things around where we give them some coins, and they can actually go and put on, the families can actually put on which outcome is the most important to them. Simple things like that, a whole lot of different varieties, ways of actually talking about prioritization. And there's some good tools with the value games around that. And we talk about that in our SRI training as well. And then basically, we start to actually draw up a picture of those programs there, where we give it back to them in a format and give them back to them in their logic model. And we just we revamped that logic model that we saw on the previous page, like the traditional one here, into what we call an impact snap, weaving it together to all these outcomes weave together towards to contribute to impact. And we give it back to them, and it's a way then that they can track their programs. They can keep it alive. They can look at how are they still affecting those same outcomes? Are those outcomes still evident? So that they comes into that refine and improve part of it. So that impact snap is just a tool that we have on our website for our members, and it's just basically a way to socialize and get people talking around and beginning to understand some of the terminology, building things like the theory of change and the logic models together, outcomes, starting to identify outcomes, positive and negative outcomes, and then leading towards impact. And it's sort of a way to then hand it back to them so that they start to think in those terms and have some skill sets around it. Yeah, so that's just one of the tools that we have within our network. There are also some videos and things around there around some of the staff that we've filmed, and they've given them to us as tools, is where they've tried to articulate what outcomes mean, the difference between outputs and outcomes, what is outcomes mean, what does impact mean, what does how do you engage with stakeholders, all those kind of things, humorous little tools that people have used to decode to actually get the understanding for themselves. So yeah, so hopefully, so just following on, totally concur with the frames that Rachel and Paul have said. We have the social return on investment training for those that want to actually go right in and impact-led design using those social value frameworks, but also just some simple tools there about decoding and actually sort of socializing the actual terminology and the steps around defining outcomes and leading to impact.